Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for December through March. Currently, we still have quite a bit of prescribed burning occurring across the Great Basin, mainly in Utah and Idaho, with a couple still left in Nevada. However, no new real wildfires across the Great Basin, and don't anticipate any of that to change here in the coming months. Over the last 7 to 14 days, the only precipitation really has been in the far north, and that's really been below normal for the time of year. However, almost 2 weeks ago, we did have some storms that did bring well above normal precipitation to southern Nevada, parts of Arizona, and to southern California. However, since then, conditions have been on the dry side for the southern and western portion of the Great Basin. Temperature and precipitation throughout the entire month of November. Very warm temperatures occurred across all of the Great Basin and really much of the West. Precipitation was really only well above normal over far southern areas of the Great Basin, and that was more towards early to mid-November. However, taking the month as a whole, we have seen below normal precipitation across much of the northern half of the region. Since the beginning of October, the beginning of the water year, again, the only areas that saw above normal precipitation were in the south, but we did see some areas in western Nevada that did have some storms earlier in the period that brought some above normal precipitation as well. Otherwise, precipitation across the north has been spotty and in some areas near normal for the time of year. However, our snowpack is still well below normal over the northern half of the Great Basin. The only areas where the snowpack is even near normal are in parts of southern and eastern Utah. We have had some storms that have brought some snowfall to northern and western areas that briefly brought the snowpack up to near normal at times. However, overall, our snowpack has continued to deteriorate with the warmer and drier conditions we've seen recently. Looking at the current drought conditions, we have seen some changes over southern and eastern areas with some improvements, but we still have large areas of moderate to severe drought over southern and eastern Nevada, all of Utah, and into eastern Idaho and Wyoming. We still have a few pockets of extreme drought left in Utah and southwest Wyoming. Otherwise, over western and northern areas, we have seen some improvements with really no drought over western and northern Nevada up into western Idaho. Looking at the drought outlook through the end of February, we are expecting the drought to either persist or intensify over much of the southern half of the Great Basin. Despite some recent wet conditions, we'll likely see overall a drier pattern in many of these areas going forward over the next few months. Further north, we do expect storms to continue to impact Idaho and Wyoming at times and even increase going through the winter, so we'll likely see more improvements across those areas. Looking at our current fuel conditions, we have seen warmer and drier conditions in some areas. Really, the only areas to watch for any increased fire potential, which would be very brief over the next 2 months, would be in areas where we still have above normal fine fuel loading that has been dried since the summer and will go dormant in many of these areas of northern Nevada, southern Idaho, and parts of northern Utah going forward. So if we do see prolonged warm and dry periods followed by very windy conditions, we could see an uptick in fire potential in some of these lower elevation areas before we see snowfall on the ground. However, looking at the rest of our fuel conditions up north, where we have had some storms, we have seen some drier conditions recently. So looking at our 100-hour fuel moisture, they have been trending downward and are very low for the time of year, but still obviously well outside of critical across Idaho. But as you can see from the green forecast line, we do expect those fuel conditions to start rapidly increasing with an increase in storms here coming in the coming weeks. Looking further south in western Nevada, that has been on the drier side. We are seeing 100-hour fuel conditions near average, but have been on the downward trend. We will likely see that downward trend continue here over the next couple of weeks with continued dry weather. Over parts of the Arizona Strip, we are seeing, again, similar conditions where the fuel moisture should be trending downward, but again, still well above our record minimums for the time of year. So putting everything together, now we'll start looking at the outlook here over the coming weeks and months. Over the next 2 weeks, we are expecting above normal temperatures, mainly across much of the Great Basin, with any drier conditions in the far south. We will see storms moving across the northern tier and entering to the Great Basin here over the next week or two, so we will see better chances of above normal precipitation across Idaho, Wyoming, and possibly northern Utah. Looking at the December monthly outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, showing warm temperatures and mainly above normal precipitation for the northern Rockies, clipping the northern portion of the Great Basin. That definitely will be the case going through the first half of December, although again, we could see some of these wetter storms bring above normal conditions a little bit further south, but still trending on the dry side for southern areas. Here's another look at some other oscillations we look at, looking at some critical years that mirror similarly to what we've been seeing this year. So this is temperature here on the left, any of the warm colors indicating the above normal potential. So still really highlighting that above normal potential for temperatures across much of the Great Basin, but could be some cooling in the far north with that storm track. Also, looking at the precipitation, there are some indicators for possibly that above normal precipitation in December for the northern half of the Great Basin and even the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. So that's a little bit different from the Climate Prediction Center outlook. So, again, something to watch here over the coming weeks. Looking at the January through March time period with La Nina in place across the region, and that will impact our weather here for the coming months. We will likely stay in a La Nina at least through some of the winter months, maybe transition more to neutral going into next year. But that weather pattern typically means drier, warmer conditions along the southern tier of the Great Basin and cooler and wetter conditions up north. And that is what the Climate Prediction Center forecast for January through March is highlighting. Looking at a couple of our other indicators in some of our years that mirror some of our conditions that are looking similar to this year, there's a greater chance going through February for cooler temperatures across much of the Great Basin, and there could even be some dry potential in northern areas as well, but we could see some storms impact parts of the Great Basin. That cooler trend seems to be a little bit more likely going into March as well, with better chances of drier in the southern areas. And again, that lack of dry signature up north would again indicate a little bit wetter pattern going over the northern half of the Great Basin. So it does support a lot of the Climate Prediction Center outlooks for the potential of any wetter conditions in the northern tier. So we are expecting normal conditions across the Great Basin for fire potential through March. And again, that would be generally low fire activity across the Great Basin. The only exceptions, again, will be the areas where we have above normal fine fuel loading in northern Nevada and southern Idaho and parts of far northern Utah under the right weather conditions after prolonged warm and dry periods. Those areas could be a concern very briefly for a burning period until we have snow on the ground in those areas. That concludes our seasonal outlook for December through March. Check back in early January for the next outlook.